Becky, we are celebrating today.
Woo!
We're just so excited. Janelle Anderson, this is Janelle Anderson. She has just wrote this absolutely amazing book, Take Center Stage, Be the Star of Your Own Story. What's funny is I got the book and she doesn't
I
yet. Or did
know.
you get it?
No, we still have.
No.
I mean, it's supposed to come tomorrow, and I'm hoping it comes today early. I'm gonna put it up. I do have the Kindle version. I meant to have that ready. But yes, the stupid snow kept. I can't believe it kept the delivery of my own book from me. But I do have it on my Kindle, on my tablet. Whoops, whoops.
Oh, that's so cool. It's fun because I ordered it. I got it the next day, but because of all of your snow, it's delayed everything. But,
Yeah.
I've just been really, really touched by this book. Your book is amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I would like for this interview, because we're going to do another one a little bit later, um, to really talk about the why behind this book
Okay.
and your story behind it, and let our listeners, or those who will listen later, know what it was that inspired you to write your book, and also the backstory.
Yeah. So well, when you read it, you'll understand the story was something that I kept quiet and secret for 30 years, and mostly because I felt really ashamed of it, and I thought that I had brought all this stuff on myself, and it was just that false belief that a lot of people who are victims of abuse and trauma feel like somehow they did it themselves and they brought it on themselves. So it was something I hadn't talked about much, except to maybe just a few very close people in my life. And when I began to go through my own healing and finally decided to deal with it and unpack everything, I was able to start telling my story. And then it got to the place where I could actually tell it publicly and in front of a large group, which was huge the first time I
It
did that.
was, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was scary, but I knew I had to do it. It was a part of a teaching I was doing. It fit in, and it was just time. It was time for me to like bring it out from the closet, so to speak, and bring it out and share it. And when I did, I discovered the power that it had on with other people to allow them to be authentic and to be true to themselves and to know that we're all human and we all go through things. And it's really the shame that causes you to hide it, and then that gives it power over you to hold you back. And
Right. It's
so
a shame, guilt, and fear.
it is.
Fear because you don't know the repercussions
Yeah.
of speaking up.
Yeah.
And what I have found is that it's not gender specific. There's men that have gone through the same thing.
Sure.
But there are so many. We are not the only ones. But it's when we speak up that we help others to understand that they too are not the only ones, and that the
Exactly.
only way to heal is to start processing it, and to actually give it voice.
Yes. Yes.
It's so important that way.
Yeah.
So you've started, speaking on stages.
Mhm.
What is your biggest dream with this message that you're bringing forward?
Um, it was interesting the difference between speaking it and then writing it. And it took me 4 years to write this book, because when I would get down to the writing of it, actually putting words on paper, it was really hard. And that was another lesson learned, I guess, or just another part of the journey, was there's something about putting something in writing and putting it out in the world, because then it lives forever, and you don't know who's going to read it. When you're speaking to an audience, it's just those people, but when you're writing something down and publishing it, it's out there. And so my hope is for it to I always say that my book is getting its wings today, that it will fly off into the world and land in the hands of those people that really need it, and will find in the pages of my book, in my story, and all the stories I tell, and in the star process that I line out in the book, that they will find their own freedom, their own truth, their own story, be able to own their own story, and you know, anything that's holding them back, if they're dealing with shame and guilt and fear, that they'll be able to release those things. And I do talk about those a lot in the book, so that they can take center stage, be the star of your own story, like really own who you are and be comfortable and happy with who you are. Because I feel like when people aren't, they're holding themselves back, but also the world is being denied their, you know, their gifts that they have to give. And it's, so I just hope that it gives people wings to fly too. You know, I guess that's a
Awesome.
thing to
Yeah,
say. Yeah.
yeah, you know, you mentioned that it took you 4 years to write your book. Why did it take 4 years to write?
Because I knew that the book needed to be written. Like it was like it spoke to me from inside and asked to be written.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept coming to me, you know, and I knew I was going to write my actual story, but I didn't know what else would come out of it. And I knew I wanted it to be more than just me telling my story. I knew I wanted it to be something that had huge value for other people to take away and apply to their own lives, and not just be something where they read a story and go, oh, well, that was an interesting story or a powerful story. So it took me a while to figure out how I wanted the book to be structured, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I figured out, because I started off just going back and reading through all my journals, and I've been journaling for 30 years. So I have tons of books and journals all over. So I sat with those and I read through every one of them. And these are
Wow.
messages, these are conversations with God. So when I pray, I get a word or I see a picture and I kind of sit with it, meditate on it. I ask, you know, what is this for? What does this mean? And I'll get messages that start to flow and I'll just write them down. And then I go back and read them and it's always like, wow. And
Right. Yeah.
so I went through and read all of those, and I started realizing that my book really needed to come from that journey. And so every chapter starts with one of those journal entries and then goes on from there, you know, what that meant to me and how it ties into this process or this journey, the star process. So I got that figured out. But then when it came time to sit down and actually write, especially the bits, and I don't spend a lot of time on the different parts of the story, but when it got down to where I had to write about the trauma, I really had a hard time. And
Yes.
there was lots of times where I just couldn't do it. I would just stare at the page or I would start to write it and I was like, "Oh, I can't do it." And I would just put it on a shelf and sometimes not think about it for months. So it wasn't like I was writing for 4 years.
No, I understand that. It took me about 4 to 5 years to write my book, and it was called The Woman I Love. And at one point, my husband said, "All right, I'm going to write this book," Just, you know, because I kept saying, you know, "Well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this," and I'd start to write. But you know, in the writing process, there's a lot of healing that takes place. Writing is what a wonderful tool to really transform the experience, because it puts things in when you have to craft the words that are going
Right,
to be read.
right.
It changes the very essence of your whole experience. But you, deep in your heart, you learn so much about just exactly your perception of what happened, about it helps put things in a whole different perspective. But there's amazing healing that comes from the actual writing of the book.
Yeah, it's so true. I've experienced so much more healing from writing, and then, you know, when you write a book, you also read it over a million times and
Mm,
through the editing process, and every time I read through it, it was like something else would come, you know, out of it for me. And I remember one way that I was able to actually begin writing those parts that were hard, I went to a friend of mine's Airbnb, rented it for a couple days, and just got away, you know, from my normal life and just put on, I think I diffused some oils and I put on music and just kind of got in that space and just sat there and, just prayed. And I just asked the Lord to like pour it out through me, like let the words just flow out of me,
Mhm.
out of my heart instead of out of my mind. And as I did that and sat in that space, it just kind of it came out without me having to think about what I was writing. It just sort of flowed out. And then when I went back and read it, it was one of the most healing things ever. I was just like, wow,
Wow, look at this.
like this is amazing, And it is true, like what you said, you see it from a different perspective than when it
We-
happened.
it's there's times when you reread and you say, "Wow, I wrote that. That's just
Yeah.
incredible." Look
Wow.
at that. And one of the things that I've always asked my authors to do is read their books aloud before, when they're in that writing stages, because oftentimes I think our minds, when we're doing the writing, we're tapping those keys, or whether we're doing it longhand, no matter how we're doing it, our mind sometimes says, "Yes, I already read that before. I know what it says." And then
Mm,
either you read it aloud or you have somebody else read it to you, and it
mm,
changes it. And then you're able to say, well, I need a little more explanation there. Well, that
yeah.
sentence didn't quite make sense. All these little things, because our minds, I think we skim read when we work, because we know we wrote it. We wrote that,
Right.
I
Right.
know what it says. And so it's quite a process to really be able to put pen to paper. And I was on well, you're probably on the same summit with Susan Crossman.
Yes.
Uh, and yesterday's conversation was about having the courage to stand up and share our stories,
Mhm,
and not only from the stage, but through the printed page.
mhm.
And the question was asked, well, why would anyone not want to hear my story? And the response is, who are you not to share your story?
Exactly.
If you could change one life, it would be worth it. But what I discovered is it often changes many lives, because we become an advocate for those that don't have the voice, that
Mm,
maybe just think they don't know how to get their way out of a situation. And for
mhm.
my experience, depression was always an issue because of the things that were just constantly haunting me until after I wrote the book, you know, and
Yeah.
all the whole process as you go through it. Um, when you realize that you're not alone, then and look what you're doing in the way you teach and the coaching that you do. So you're bringing people together and uniting them to learn a whole new way of supporting each other, and also of supporting themselves to in their healing process. And you shed light of truth and you show the way. So it's the pillars of understanding how important our storytelling is, and what an important time this is for us to keep shining the light, for others, to help them to know that, there's many of us that have gone through this. Our stories, there's nothing new under the sun, but our
Mhm.
stories, our individual stories, are very unique to us. And
Yes.
yet it's by having the courage to share our stories, that we can make a difference in our world. And so
Yes.
my hat's off to you on,
Thank you.
really, really, that you stood up, and you're not only sharing your story, but you give tangible, wonderful steps that a person can take to go through the journey and begin their healing process, or continue their healing process. Very,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah, and that part was so important to me. Like I said, I wanted people to be able to apply it and take it and use it, and of course, that's the teacher in me. I'm always gonna say, "This is the way you do it." But I love what you just said, and I feel like this idea of owning your own story, this was huge for me, and I do talk about that also in the book, and I quote Brené Brown because her writings were so huge for me as I was going
Mhm.
through my process. And I remember sitting there one day reading one of her books that said she talked about owning your story, and it was like this revelation, like, "Oh, I've never owned my story. I've always tried to separate it from me, like it would happen to somebody else, or it wasn't, it didn't have anything to do with me." And yet what that did was it kind of divided me. I wasn't a whole person. And I had this revelation that if I own that and just say it did happen to me, it is a part
Yes.
of my story. And that led me into this place of really having compassion for my younger self. Like, I'd never done that before. I'd always been ashamed of her.
Mhm.
But this
Yes.
opened up the door for me to be compassionate and see myself in a different light and grieve over everything that happened, but also forgive and embrace and love. And it was huge. It was just this owning of my story, wrapping my arms around myself and being able to be whole again.
Right.
And so that's what I really want others to be able to take away from it for
Well, it's
themselves.
because we're typically much harder on ourselves than
We are.
anyone else would
Yeah.
be, and sometimes because of the deep inner grief that takes place, it's hard to you it's difficult to climb that mountain sometimes. But when we do, what's on the other side is pretty fabulous.
It's fabulous. And I ran from it for so long. I was so afraid to look at that part of my life. I didn't want to feel the emotions from remembering it or talking about it. And that avoidance of it actually kept me from being free, and from walking in my own truth and being able to be open and vulnerable and intimate with people in my friendships, because I had shut myself down and it had separated me from a lot of my life. And it brought that wholeness. And it really is, looking at it from the mountaintop from the other side, it's like so worth it going through that. And really finding true healing. I feel like it was like how you clean out your closets and you clean out all the clutter in your house, and how good
Yes,
that,
like
yeah,
freeing.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it feels like.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know. I have when I was raising my children, I was a single mom for 20 years, and
Wow.
we did a lot of fun crafts together. We did a lot of things together as my daughters were growing up, and I'm going through my craft rooms, and I remember this is from, they were 3 when we did this one, and I was like, so what am I doing with all of this stuff?
Right.
Because and today's kids want different things, so I've been kind of sorting and getting rid of, and I'm like, wow, that it feels good, but I have some
Mm.
of them for one of my bonus daughters, and I was like, it's all out in the garage. I need to take it to her, and I keep looking. Oh,
Yeah, you don't want to let it go.
but
Yeah.
yeah, but it is so freeing, and it's so nice to walk in the craft room and say, "Oh, I can find everything because there's so much less there."
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
it is, it's like a letting go of things that maybe aren't serving you anymore. And, doesn't mean that you forget about them, but I don't know, it's a different way. It's like a different relationship that you have with yourself and with the past. And
yes, for sure. So
isn't
for those that are listening, take center
it
stage.
pretty? It's so pretty.
It's so pretty. It's a beautiful book. The layout on the inside is
Oh, it's
wonderful. And
gorgeous.
Janelle has a workbook that goes along with this, and it's linked in the book so that you can get it. It's available as a paperback. It's available. Will be should be showing pretty soon as the hardcover, because we've got the hardcover done, and as a Kindle version. Pick this book up and take the time. Don't skim read it. Take the time to really digest. Read a chapter at a time and really digest it. Pick up the workbook that goes with it. This afternoon at 3 your time, I think it is, right? We're
Right.
having our next, so that's 3 Eastern.
Mhm.
What? 3, gotta go backwards,
And
11 Pacific.
12,
No,
12
12
Pacific.
Pacific, 12
Mhm.
Pacific. And we will be having another conversation, only this time we're going to talk about her star process and what exactly that looks like, and which is at the core, really at the core, the teaching of what she's teaching throughout this book. Janelle, I want to congratulate you. I put the link in the stream. You can
Mhm.
click that link and go right to the book, but take the time. This is one fabulous, amazing book, and I'm so proud to have been able to work right alongside you and bringing this to the world in the way
Yes.
that you're doing.
Yes.
Awesome.
Before we sign off, though, I wanted to also acknowledge my daughter. It's her birthday today, Shauna
Oh,
Thompson.
and that's
And
why we did this launch today.
we launched it on purpose on her birthday. The book is actually dedicated to her because she was such a big part of my story, and she's taught me so much. And when she was little and I was going through some of the hardest times, she was my rock. Actually, she's my little buddy, but she really is the best part of my story and the best part of my life, and that's why it's dedicated to her. She's taught me a lot about being real and being honest. I remember when she was young, she would always question things I was doing, and I'd have to sit and think, well, oh my gosh, yeah, I never thought about that. That's true. And she would always kind of call to that place in me that was hiding to come out and be seen and be real. And I have to acknowledge her because, it was her father who was one of the abusers in my life. And I always had to make sure when she was young, that was one reason I couldn't tell the story. I mean, how do you tell your story? That you're, for your, and she was too young to understand it. So then when she got older and was able to, we were able to talk it out, it was like, okay, are you sure you're okay with me writing this in a book?
Mhm.
And she was like, oh yes, of course. I want your story to get out there. So happy birthday to Shauna. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. And also thank you for all the comments, everybody that's
Yeah, I
commenting.
see the comments coming through, like, yay!
And those of you that are buying my book and workbook, yay! Awesome.
It's
Thank
awesome.
you. Yes.
Well, thank you for this beautiful time. Thank you for working together like we have and bringing this. There's a lot of work that goes into producing a book of any nature, but this one has special value, special sweetness to it in the sense of really helping us go deep into the core of what's holding us back, what's been moving us forward, and helping us to shine in this world, because all of us shining our light, it makes an entirely better world.
Yes. And thank you, Becky. You've been amazing to work with. Fabulous. I mean, you've walked me through every step of the process, and the cover was, you found that picture and we were both like, that's
That's
it.
it. That's
And the
it.
design inside, I mean, everything about it, I just love it. And you're just fabulous to work with as a publisher. So
Thank you. Thank you.
it's been great.
Awesome. So stay tuned for the next broadcast a little bit later. And then Janelle is also having a online Zoom book launch party.
Yeah.
Later today will be at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Yes.
Celebrate with her, support her on this beautiful time that she's bringing this work to the world. And I praise you for that you had the courage to stand up and bring this, do the work that you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Join us again later on.
Yeah. Bye-bye.